Welcome to episode 10 of the podcast. I'm doing this selfie style this time, and today we're talking about Fizz, the high end and hiss of the guitars, and how to choose which drum samples to use in your mix.
3, 2, 1. This is the ASKJV Show.
Our first question comes from Shane. Hey JV, I've heard a lot of talk about phase issues in mixing and mastering. How much of an issue is it, and what is your approach to minimizing and correcting phase problems?
So when it comes to phase, I'm more so concerned about that during the tracking stage. If I am tracking a song, I'll check all the mics in a drum kit, for example, flip the phase in and out one at a time and see if something's sounding weird, see if something's sounding phasey. It kind of comes with time. You start to just train your ears to hear certain things and know when mics are out of phase. So that's basically my approach. I don't dwell on it too much and try to analyze it super in depth and make sure everything is exactly perfect. It's just, you just use your ears to see if something sounds weird. And if it does, then you move a mic until it sounds better. When it comes to mixing, like I said, if I tracked it, I'm really not paying attention to phase when it comes to the mix because I've already thought about that. But if I'm mixing a song that someone sent to me, I will throw it in mono and listen to the drums and flip phase in and out. And, if I'm listening to the kick and I'm listening to the drum kit in mono and I flip the phase on the kick and it sounds better, it sounds like more low end, then I just roll with that and I move on, do the same thing with the snare, etc. But yeah, there's also weird things. Like sometimes you get a song to mix and you flip the phase and maybe all of the mid-range sounds way better and you have a nice attack, but you lose some low end. Or you flip it and you get way more low end, but then the mid-range attack kind of goes away. And in those kind of scenarios, I just choose whatever one's better and then I make up the rest, either, using a sample instead or just make up for it with EQ and whatnot. I don't ever get into these kind of complicated phase plugins and stuff. That never appealed to me. I don't want to be worrying about that stuff while I'm mixing. I just, I do the flipping phase, make sure stuff is sounding as correct as possible, and then I just go on and mix. So that's my stance on that.
Our next question comes from Brandon. I feel like I struggle with trying to get my guitars as clean as possible, both in tracking and mixing. I'm always afraid of the high end, particularly in the 3 to 4K area. Am I worried about nothing? What is too fizzy and sharp versus too dull? Should I leave the fizz alone?
I'm not sure if I totally understand what you mean by clean when you say you're trying to get them as clean as possible, but you're talking about the high end and the fizz. I will often, I'll always do, pretty much always do a low pass filter, around 10, 12 K on electric guitars, maybe even lower sometimes if the high end's really, really, really crazy, really fizzy, even down to like 8K or something, especially on lead guitars too, because I don't want that fizz to build up. The more guitar layers there are in a mix, the more I'll filter them off. Then also I'll notch out, around usually between 3.5 and 4.5K, somewhere in there is a pretty harsh fizzy sound that I dip out a little bit. I'm not one of those guys. I've heard lately like guys that are totally nuking like 4K. I don't do that. I dip out, a couple dB with a narrow EQ, and that's good for me because I find if you cut out too much of that hiss and the fizz and the high end, you kind of lose a lot of the energy from the guitar. So I like to do just enough that it really makes a big difference, but it doesn't totally change the tone and it doesn't kill the energy and the bite of the tone. So yeah, I would say usually around the 4K area, somewhere in there, it's good to do a little narrow dip. Usually I do, the classic technique of boosting and then kind of sweeping around that area, see where the noise jumps out the most, and then just dip it down a little bit there. But make sure you leave some high end and a little bit of that aggressive bite in there in the mix to make your guitar sound energetic.
Our last question comes from Chris. Great advice. I was wondering how you go choosing which samples to reinforce drums with. I hear people say not all samples work, but how do you choose?
When I'm choosing drum samples, I'm basically, I'll duplicate, the live track. So I'll duplicate the live kick track, for example, and I'll throw the trigger plugin on there. And I'll try to play the live kick with a sample, and I'll just audition different samples. And really what I'm listening for is a sample that blends with the live the live sound and makes it sound bigger, makes it sound fuller, and fills in something that it's missing. Because a lot of times, especially with like kick, lots of low end, some samples are just, the phase is just going to be off, like not necessarily flipped, but it's just going to be a little bit off. Like the low end's just going to be different. And when you blend that with your live kick, you're actually going to cancel out a bunch of low end, or you might cancel out some of the attack or something. So I'm looking for sample. I'll just audition, out of 4 or 5 different kick samples and see which one's sounding the best, see what's mixing the best. And then I just go from there. I don't make it complicated. I don't spend hours auditioning samples and trying different blends and stuff. I just try to quickly find one that works really well. Same deal with snare. But yeah, try, especially if you're, I guess I should say I'm talking about not totally replacing the drums, but augmenting them with samples. You want to make sure you're auditioning it with the live kick sound and making sure that the phase is okay. And all I mean by that is that when you add the sample, it sounds bigger. It doesn't sound smaller or make it sound weird in any way. So that's my approach. I do have a YouTube video on this called how to use drum samples in your mix. And that kind of walks through the exact workflow I just described, shows it on the screen, how I use Trigger, and then how I audition the samples, and then how I actually print them down to audio tracks as well, and why you should do that. So I'll try to link that up on the screen here for you. All right, thanks for watching this week's episode, or listening if you're listening to the podcast in your car or on your headphones or whatever. Let me know what you thought of this episode, doing it just with my phone here. Hopefully the audio is okay. I know it's maybe not as good as when I use the mic, but it's kind of fun doing it like this, a little bit casual. Let me know what you think. As always, send your questions to askjvpod.com. And if you're not on my mailing list, make sure you jump on that ASAP. I'll send you my free mixing cheat sheet, and you always get all of my best content and updates of stuff I'm doing through the mailing list as well. So the link is below in the description for the mixing cheat sheet. Join the list, and I will see you then. I'll talk to you then. All right, see you next week.